God, laying your majesty aside. You reached down in love to show me life. Lifted from darkness into light. Oh, King for a slave, trading your righteousness for shame. Despite all my pride and foolish ways, caught in your infinite embrace. Oh, and I find myself here on my knees again, caught up in grace like an avalanche. Nothing compares to this love, 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 burning in my heart. Burning in my heart. Burning in my heart.
I look at wellness, and the actual definition of wellness is the quality or state of a mental, physical, being in good mental, physical condition, and of course spiritual, which is the root of everything. I think of us people as being mindful spirit bodies, because we all have a spirit that we're trying to take care of, and with that, God has given us this vessel, the intellectual and the emotional, the physical being that allows us to work at whatever He gives us to do. He gives us different talents, He gives us different qualities in our attributes, as personalities, but it all comes down to the spiritual aspect of what it is that we need to achieve. And I believe it's just attaining to the knowledge of God and His wisdom. And a lot of that is seen through life that we are able to partake in mentally, emotionally, and physically. I myself have seen a lot of different aspects of my own life where if something had been off, as I had been taking care of my my spiritual self, as well as my physical self, or my physical self as well as my mental self, and it's all encompassing. I tend to take the holistic approach, which is the mind-body connection is essential to well-being. We need to be active in our pursuit of obtaining that wellness in all aspects of our life. And with that, there needs to be an understanding of what's best, and I found that in God's Word, in the Bible, in the Scripture, that if I am to seek wisdom, the beginning of that is to seek God. He's made us in His image. He knows how we're supposed to operate. The physical aspects of training our bodies is a great example of how we are to train our spirits, our minds. there was a time in my life where I was going through a lot of tragedy, a lot of mental strain and emotional strain, and they call it the metaphysical, where your mind is involved in how the physical state of your body is either in decay or growth. We're either going one way, or either going towards decay, or we're either going towards growth. We're all getting older, that's true. We're all wasting away in the sense of there's a natural order of things in the way that we're going to do, but we don't have to do it in a way that's degenerative. During this period of time where I was going through a lot of the tragedy and going through a lot of the strain and mental and emotional taxing, I call it, my body started to break down. I had actually been in a wheelchair for a period of time. People look at me and I'm like, now I'm at a different state, thankfully so. And but it was just something that just had happened because of not in excess of life. Sometimes we can't take care of everything. We need help here and there, and it had just been a point where there was a lot to be taken care of, and so there was an imbalance that happened where I wasn't able to take care of myself completely emotionally or even spiritually and physically, but it manifested physically where I lost strength in my one leg and experienced what I call as a flare up, in the sense where I guess the part of the tragedy that had really impacted me the most, where I was unable to express the emotions that I was going through, and I was unable to take care of the mental strain that it put on. So physically, when we don't allow that for ourselves, we house it in ourselves, we house it in our body, and it will start to manifest as pain, degeneration, where I experienced the most excruciating pain I ever want to feel in my life, and I lost all strength in my legs, so therefore I wasn't able to walk. That time in my life, it was interesting because a lot of doctors didn't know what was going on. They're trying to find something, to attribute to this condition, but God had led me to an understanding, of what it was, and allowed me to realize that I needed to take care of the emotional issues that were causing a lot of pain in my life. I needed to have an outlet to be able to express that. And there's ways that we can do that. I do that a lot through prayer. I do that through being able to talk to someone that I really trust and that can counsel me in the way, in God's way that I've chosen. And even in writing, I'm an artist, both, drawing and writing poetry, and also in the performing arts. And I've done a number of pieces that have allowed me to experience that like they call it the cathartic experience, where I had written about that period of my life and put it in an artistic piece that was able to express, that and hopefully help people. There's many ways that we can do that, and that God has given us an opportunity to use us, through our talents. And through a series of taking care of my mental strain, my emotional strain, and then just giving my body what it needed, and the time, the care, I was able to, gradually get myself up out of the wheelchair, onto crutches, and then walking again. And now I'm in the gym. I do my own kind of exercise, but it's high intensity, and it's a lot of heavy strength training and stuff. And it's taken these years that I've been able to take care of myself, both spiritually, mentally, and emotionally, and keeping that balance is the only way that we're able to excel in either way, and have the best life that God has given us, to live life to the full. very familiar with suffering. And in my own way, I think we all suffer in our own way, and not to dismiss anyone's suffering less than another. Whatever God gives us, He doesn't give us more than we can handle, He says. But there was definitely a point in my life where I had a really hard time believing that truth, believing that God, I can't believe that You don't give us more than we can handle, because I felt so overburdened. And that period of my life, I remember that it was very hard for me to pray. It was very hard for me to read, and hear from God. But the one thing that helped me, and this is where I was able to do my piece in Psalm 88, if you read that psalm, there's really no ending to as far as like, oh, everything's going to be great. It just ends like darkness is my closest friend. And I really believe that is like the bowels of sorrow, where we're just like, I don't see the light. I don't see the end. But the great part about that psalm is that the psalmist is still going to God, is still going and knowing and not forgetting the power of God, and that's the glory, and that's the praise in it. And what really helped me is that even though I couldn't find the words, even though I didn't understand what was going on, I kept going to the source. Suffering, a lot of times we can feel like there is nobody that relates. I don't think anyone can truly relate in the sense of circumstances and like individual strengths and weaknesses, or but we can all relate to the understanding of like feeling lost, or feeling like I not understanding why something's happening, and the need to understand, the need for God, the need, and I found the beauty in that. I found the beauty in suffering, I believe. I'm sure there's more that I can learn, but I found the beauty in suffering is realizing my need for Christ. Suffering is the way that I've gotten through it. It's just to remember that even though I don't see God because of my suffering, I feel clouded, or maybe if I don't understand God in the moment because of my suffering and my lack of understanding, He is still there. He's always there. Like I can't forget the truth, even through my emotions. I can't forget the truth. I think a lot of times too, we can forget that just in like, when my emotions get in the way, it clouds the truth, and it's really good to keep going back to where I know the truth is, whether it's in reading His Word or in people that I know that have been in the practice of reading and applying His Word and actively seeking revelation in that way.
Wake is a music theater piece about a woman who accidentally kills her own child. And I actually made a film documentary about this woman. It's based on a real woman named Haley Wesley. And Haley Wesley is located in Northern California, and I was very good friends with her family. And so I knew when I was watching this happen for real in front of me, I knew that this would be a very powerful story to share with people, for the purpose of understanding that this can happen to anyone, that we can all actually do something so terrible that we feel like we could never be forgiven. And after we made that documentary, it was about a year or so later where I was thinking about what piece I should make. And I started to think about the story again, realizing that we had never looked at a certain part of her life. Right after she accidentally kills her child by leaving the child in the car, she leaves her family and her job for about 4 months and goes back to her hometown of Hawaii, where her family's from. And she stays there for 4 months, and then she comes back. And I kept thinking that this 4 months, what has to go through you in those 4 months that allow you to come back? And I started to think of that as the dark night of the soul, and that coming back would be coming back to the land of the living. And I started to think of what kind of self-torture must you go through? What kind of grief and guilt must you, the spirals of grief and guilt that you must put yourself through during that time in order to be able to say, I will re-enter the world and I can have children and I can be a good wife to my husband and I can be a good daughter to my parents and I could possibly be a good mother again. So I was very interested in that time period, like what actually has to happen in order to return to the living.
I see prayer as something, it's something people often do together, but still when you pray, you're communicating with your idea of the divine or God or the universe or however you want to talk about the divine. That's the relationship. It's me, the prayer, communicating with that force or that being. And sometimes that is the purpose of music as well, but there's also a lot of music that people make specifically to communicate with other people. There's a lot of music that is deliberately made to spread a message, not so much to God, but to other people in society, and to just to express, hey, here's how I feel about this particular issue. Here's what's going on in my life. A lot of times it's as simple as making something that makes other people feel better. It's providing something that helps other people, whether it's some of the music I make under my own name, people use it, they find it helps them to concentrate when they're studying or meditating or painting. But there's also a lot of pop music is really helpful to people where some will write a song about, say, going through like a breakup in a romantic relationship, and other people will hear that song and identify with the lyrics, and it'll help them a lot. So I think that's kind of a different purpose of music that is really common and also very valuable.
Being closer to God or being farther away from God, whether those concepts exist. Well, I guess the question is what, who, where is God for that person, right? It depends. For myself, I definitely feel like my relationship with the divine has taken on many different forms from the time I was born until this moment. And I definitely can tell you that I have felt farther or closer to the divine. And to me, that is sitting in the understanding of a stillness and of an understanding of the connectedness to the universe. So absolutely, like sometimes I feel very far from that and sometimes I feel very close to that. Whether or not it is true is a different story. Because when I am feeling the closest I can feel to the divine, I realize that it's always there. That God, if you want to call that God, is always there. It's just my own perception of where I am in relationship to that which is all-encompassing. So whether or not it's true, I don't know. But I certainly think that our perception and how we see things has a lot to do with how we act and that's something that I'm very interested in. How can we always remember that it's about what we think or our perception, which is very limited as human beings? So how can we continually widen our perception so that we don't just act upon what we think what we're just reacting to, but sort of see everything a bit more clearly, see the transparency behind what is? That to me is being closer to the divine. Yeah. There's a wonderful saying that Leonard Cohen stole from Rumi. And the way Leonard Cohen says it, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And there's a Japanese word that actually talks about how a piece of pottery is broken, that when it's mended together with gold often, that is actually makes it more beautiful than it ever could be because it was broken. And those things actually are very linked to what you saw in the production, that as we get farther and farther into this depth of despair, that's perhaps when we search the most. That's when we need the most. So again, I think that divine, I think that's always there. It just makes it more necessarily evident when we get to the point where we can't see anything else. When our need is greatest, I think that's when we search the most.
You know, Brandon was an atheist, and so was his dad. And yet I still think God speaks very powerfully through his life story. Brandon went through some intense grief, and obviously he came through that, but I think God's fingerprints are all over that story. Nobody else has to believe that. He doesn't have to believe that, and I don't fault anybody for that. But I think that if a person is able to see that maybe that terrible situation I went through was for my benefit in the end, as terrible as it may have seemed at the time, then they're more open to seeing that, no, that was what God intended for me. That was... It's not that when you're going through a tough time, God doesn't care about you. It's when you're going through a tough time, God is actually watching the closest, because that's what he's using to help you to become the person he wants you to be and you want to be. You know, it's all part of what I've been learning just through learning about this wonderful man, Brandon Lee. You know, grief is a difficult process. It's got stages, but you know, if you can be inspired to get through that, your dreams are right on the other side. But if you can't get through that, you're like a fish stuck in a fishnet just trying to get out and never really fulfilling and living life to the full.
Sometimes we feel separated from God, and sometimes, many times perhaps even, alone in our spiritual lives. We can feel disconnected from God for many reasons. But Jesus himself has promised us that he will be with us even into the end of the ages. And one of the ways that he has fulfilled that promise is by coming to us in and through the Blessed Sacrament. At every Mass, Jesus himself comes down to us. But we also have the opportunity to receive him daily in Holy Communion, that we ourselves have the opportunity to become holy tabernacles of Christ's presence. Sometimes, though, we can feel as if prayer is sort of like a duty. During my formation as a friar, I had a great priest who was one of my formators, and he told me this. He said, sometimes you'll come to prayer and you're so filled with consolations that you'll be so filled with the sense of God's presence. And he says, you know, when that happens, That's God's gift to you. At other times, we come to prayer and sometimes we may feel distant from God. And despite our efforts, we may not actually feel His presence. But nevertheless, the good priest who was my formator told us that we should persevere, because when we persevere, even though we perhaps don't feel God's nearness to us in that moment, that is our gift to God. One of the places where it is that many people are able to experience God's nearness is in the context of Eucharistic adoration. We're told as Christians that we need to pray. Sometimes we can feel as if it's a duty, but most times, once it is that we actually make an effort to pray, especially in the context of Eucharistic adoration, in a setting like we have at Catholic Underground, people taste and see that Jesus Himself is there. And then prayer is no longer a duty, it's a joy.
Find myself here on my knees again, caught up in grace like an avalanche. Nothing compares to this love.